Cool. Hey everyone. First, thank you for being here. Very exciting to speak today and talk about agents. If you are working with agents, if you are working with observability, if you are working with evaluations, this is the perfect talk. We are going to explain some of the things that we are doing internally in the next 25 minutes and how you can use these good practices to replicate your agents and as well what you can do with actually these agents if you are working with computer vision pipelines. And let's start with the simple thing that is, what is this agent? And to give you more context, we are building like the harness where you can put any agent. Like if you are working with OpenAI models, if you are working with Anthropic, if you are working with Gemini models, you can use your own model and you can actually connect to this harness that is going to be in 51 and you are going to be able to do the full pipeline. I'm talking about annotations, I am talking about workflow creation, I am talking about evaluation models, inference, training, like all the things that you have to do usually when you are working with physical AI data, you can do it with an agent. And I know that this sounds cool, and actually it's pretty cool. However, the reality is that when you start to create this system, you find that there are many blockers and many issues that you have to solve. For example, your agents start to call tools that doesn't exist, or sometimes your agent is trying to do a task, but it's spending like 20 loops trying to find the correct tool to do it, and then it's spending money for you. And at the end, there is other ways to do it more, more like in a better way. And as well, there are other issues that you can find. And today, as I said before, we are going to explore how you can solve this with something that is scenarios, how you can solve this with observability in all the pipelines, and not completely, but how you can work and improve this with sandboxes. Okay, about me, I am Ado. If you want to connect with me, just this is the QR code. It's very small, but I can share this later. I am a ML engineering working in the DevRel team at Voxel 51, one of the creators of the 51 agents, our system that is able to do all of these computer vision and physical AI tasks in your data with a couple of prompts. And yeah, this is like the beginning, and it's so for some of you, if you are working with agents and you are already working with evaluations, you know that um, it's important to get idea of what is the difference between traditional evaluation and agents evaluation. And if you are a developer, you know that usually we create unit tests, we create integration tests, we do some mock dependencies, we create static assertions, because usually the code, it's, you know what is the expected output, you know what is going to be the string that you are going to receive, you know what exactly is going to happen in the traditional software. But then we have all of these agents that are doing multiple things and that can solve the problem in hundreds of different ways. And there is not a way to say this is the correct answer. Actually, they can answer the same question in multiple ways, and you have to find a more smart way to find how good is your model and as well evaluate each of the components that your model has. Let me just like gonna yeah. Things that you have to do, for example, it's end-to-end workflow. And let's say that you create your agent use skills, use MCP, use some guardrails. If you evaluate each of these elements individually, it's completely different if you evaluate the end-to-end workflow from a user perspective. And this is something that we are going to explore today. As well, you have to think more in a probabilistic success criteria where you have not only like a fail or pass, you have to have like, okay, what specific score can I give to this response? And as well, my agent was able to call the MCP or they just ignore that, or a small kind of evaluation that is going to help you to understand what is happening in the black box of the agent if you are using a closed model. Cool. Let me move to what we call CI for probabilistics, because as I said before, we have no deterministic system. It's very hard to use traditional software. We need to start to think in more like a probabilistic system where I can evaluate my model in different components. And to do that, we have to talk about what are the relevant components that an agent has today. And I split it in three. You can split it wherever you want, but I split it in three. And it's the execution and actions, the intelligence part, and the safety and reliability that contains guardrails. And if we go to the first one, execution and actions, and we start to explore this is small components. This could be like a small function that you have that have to call a specific toolbox and that's gonna return something to you. Actually, here you know the input and you know the output. That's why here you can follow the same idea of traditional evaluation metrics because you know what happened when you put the input, you know the code, that's not gonna change, it's a static code, and then you know the output. These execution and actions, I recommend you to use traditional evaluations. Then we jump to intelligence. This is the more complicated part because now you have LLMs. You have not only one, you can have Gemini, you can have the latest model, and you start to see difference between these models. As well, you have skills that it's not only the skills as a context, like you know, the skills is Markdown files with a lot of like step-by-step steps in general to follow and do one task. But sometimes the question is, do my agent actually call the skills and then my skill is good enough that actually help me to solve an answer and solve the problem? And then we have memory, we have judge models in your LLM. Sometimes people add an LLM that evaluate the prompt before going to answer the user. We don't use that as the traditional system, but there are some systems that do these kind of things. Uh, for me, intelligence is where you have to put more effort to be able to get numbers about how good is your model because it's completely not deterministic. Then we have the reliability and safety, where we have guardrails, we have permissions, policies, observations, where you are getting all the things that are happening in your system. This is the most important for me if you are working with enterprise users. You can have an LLM, you can do beautiful things, but your LLM is gonna be as good as the tool that you provide. What happens if you provide more tools, your agent is going to have more things that they can do, but in the same time open a safety risk that we have to take in account. Just talking about the example that happened this week with OpenAI and Hugging Face, where these agents that was in a sandbox, they jump outside the sandbox. We are going to talk about sandbox in a bit, but it was able to find a way with the tool that they have to go and actually go we say outside, but it's not like outside, it's just finding a way to use a tool to do something that was restricted but actually was not. That's why this is extremely important. Like it's very important. If you care about your clients, your users, you have to spend too much time here, and this is part of the evaluation. Now, one takeaway I want to try to I just put this button here. By the way, these slides are beautiful. I love it, and I created using, of course, agents. And it's a new way to see the slides. And I think I like it. If you like slides, I can share this later. But key takeaway: test the components as components, but evaluate the system. This is a complex system with multiple elements. You have to be able to evaluate each of the elements that has this system, and the best way to evaluate it, that we think is the best one, it's based on scenarios. That's why we are not gonna evaluate prompt answer. We are gonna evaluate multi-turn evaluations. That means that multiple message, like a more real conversation, and as well we are going to evaluate this in an offline way. That means that the conversation is not getting this information in real time, it's just saving the conversation, and then we go to this conversation and we run these scenarios and we get all the metrics that are happening in our data set. Cool, this is going to be our goal. If you take this, like if you are working with agents, if you are creating this and you create components and then evaluate the components and then evaluate end to end, you are in a good path, and this is part of what you have to do with make your agent more easier to evaluate. And after that, we are going to talk about scenarios. I'm going to check if there is some questions. I think these questions are from the other speaker. Yes, they are more about the visual video generation. Okay, I'm going to answer a question at the end. Okay, so far we have been talking about agents, important to evaluate components and system. And now we are talking about how we can actually evaluate that. And we use a word that is scenarios, because a scenario, it's the best way to replicate a real user. We are going to start this with a user story that is a developer that is working with a data set, has to do something. And then based on that, we are going to create all of this scenario that is going to run in our system and is going to be able to use all the harness automatically without a user iteration. And to do that, we have to talk about where this model is going to run. And this is going to run in 51. Jimmy already mentioned about 51, but in this perspective of agents, think like the harness where you or your agents can work with your data, from create your data, that's mean like find bias, distribution, diversity, like understand your data, then annotate your data, like find things that are in your data that you can improve, then generate data. That's mean that you can find where are the gaps and then fill that gap with extra data that you can collect, or you can use some of the techniques to create synthetic data as well. Then we have evaluation, and all of these are aligned to multimodality. That means you can use LiDAR information, video, images, whatever information you have, and integrate it in 51. And this is like the hardest place where we are going to put our agent, and where we are going to use the scenarios to actually evaluate it. That's why it's very important that you understand that it's going to run inside 51. Now, this is the story, and this is what we would like to evaluate. This is one of the stories that users that work with 51 has, but there are many other stories. You have your own story. Maybe you are working with underground data. You are working with get information about pipes, and maybe you have problems like drift when you are creating the 3D reconstruction. Each of the customer that we have has different problems, but I just want to mention one that is someone that is working with dash cameras. It has more than 50,000 dash cameras, and what they are trying to do is try to find what are the most likely mislabeled, but with a specific constraints. That is, they have cars, they have pedestrians, they have cyclists, but they don't want to focus in cars. They want to focus in the most likely mislabeled with cyclists and pedestrian next to the cars, like compared to the cars. Like it's very specifically, it's not only find what are the hardest labels, or what are the samples that are harder to labeling, or maybe that can have issue. It's more about, in my full data set that is not balanced because I have more cars, usually happen if you have a dash camera, I have a small amount of pedestrian, a small amount of cyclists. I would like to focus on that. And if you have been working with 51, you know that the first answer is, okay, let's use compute mistakeness. This is going to help us to get these kind of metrics about what is the possible issue that we have with our data set. However, we have to take in account the frequency. Because we don't have the frequency here, we have to do some small twist of this function to be able to use it to my specific case. That is why now I have a problem, but I need a specific plugin that help me to do that. In this case, I need to build a plugin that is able to find this information. And then the agent is going to do that. There are multiple ways to do it. This is just an example, as I said before. But you can do something like embeddings, but embeddings filtering scenarios where you have the pedestrian, the cyclist, and the car, and then you can use that to find the distance of each of the elements of this class. For example, pedestrian, and compare the distance between the centroid of this class. And there are multiple ways to do it. This is one way, but we would like that the agent do that without user iterations. That is important. Okay. So far, now we have we have a scenario. It's a reality. It's something that someone can have. We don't want to label in all the data. We have to find this one that are maybe mislabeled. And we create the evaluation idea, the scenario idea. What is in the scenario files? The first thing that you're gonna find in the scenario file is gonna be the metadata. That is gonna contain the user story that I just mentioned, the component that you want to test. In this case, I would like to test the write plugin and the test plugin, two specific plugins that we have in our toolbox of 51 agent. We have as well like the persona. And what is the persona? The persona think like a user, a real persona, but in this case, it's an agent that is gonna play the role as a persona, that is gonna have a goal. This is the goal. It's gonna have a previous knowledge. That means that they know the painful thing that they have. They know that cyclist it's rare or it's difficult or they don't have many of these labels. They know that information, and they know the completion criteria. Like they know, oh, sorry, they know that they have to build a plugin or the agent has to build a plugin, and that this plugin has to score and sort the mistakes, the mistakes weights, and then return this value to the user. Here, this is an agent. Like we have our agent and we have an external agent that is going to help us in this scenario to be able to play the role as a user, to use and to try to break our system and to be able to evaluate it. Then we have this is the scenario. We have as well the rubrics. Very important, rubrics. We need to evaluate, we need to know what we are going to evaluate. And this is extremely important because, as I said before, you can evaluate components. This is going to be in the unit test. But in this scenario, you are going to evaluate how everything works. But this, how everything works, has small pieces. And one of the pieces that you can add is my agent was able to call the skills. Let's say that we have a skill that help you to build plugins. The question is, in this conversation that my agent has with this agent persona, was my agent able to call the skill and actually retrieve that information and use it? And the second question is, for example, my agent used the tool that help you to create plugins as well. My agent was able to get information about the docs. We have a tool that help you to get information about the docs real time and get the latest advance. It was able to call that and get all the context possible to be able to do it. And you can start to add more constraints like these ones, constraints that are going to help you to measure small components in your system. And then, of course, you have to have the global and the end-to-end evaluations. For example, do I get a score of each of the samples in my data set? If I have a score, what is the score? Is that a score aligned of the expected score? And maybe here I'm going to stop for a second because why an expected score? If you are working with evaluation scenarios, you have to know what is the expected output in a way that you can control. For example, if you are working in this data set and you want to filter cars, it's very simple. You can filter the class manually in 51, and then you know how many cars do you have, the samples and everything, and then you can use that to ask the same question to the agent and validate that you are getting the same response. It's very, in that case, manually, but it's a good way to validate it in the initial point where you want to know if your agent is doing the basic task. That's why you define the rubrics, you define the persona, you define the goals, and you put all of these things together to evaluate your agent. Cool. I'm gonna stop. Oh, let me just run this and then I'm gonna answer the two questions that I have here. Running the scenarios. Okay, then of course you are running the scenarios. Now this is the good thing about this. You can run the same scenario 20 times. And you're gonna find that sometimes the same is exactly text from initial and the ping pong conversation can give you 7 or 10, like can give you different results. And you say, but it's exactly the same. Yes, but it's not deterministic. Sometimes there are things that can affect the model, and we want to evaluate that. That's why you can do this in something that we call rollouts. Rollout is how many times do you want to run the same scenario to be able to get like an average of the performance of your model. And as well, you can define which model would you like to run. You can run multiple models, new state-of-the-art models. Sometimes it's about models, like you test an old model and you see the big difference with the new ones. Sometimes there is a new release. You want to see if this is better or no. If you want to recommend this to your users, you just use the same scenario, include the new model, run it, and then get metrics. And you can now know no base in a benchmark, because benchmark are good. I am not saying that it's not good, but sometimes it's not. The benchmark are very specific in an area, and your customer has some specific criteria. That's why you have to focus in your customers. This is exactly the perfect way to evaluate your customers and your real experience in your enterprise account. And then you have something that we call variant. Variant are, as I said at the beginning, you can say the same thing in 10 different ways. Like you can say the same prompt in multiple ways. You have to create this variation in a way that you can have prompts that are specifically direct what would you like to do. Then you can have negative prompts. Let's say that you want to do something, but you write it in a negative way, or sometimes you don't want that the agent is able to do it. You can have as well paraphrase prompts where you try to say the same but in a different words. And you can have multiple variants in your system and run all of these variants plus all of these rollouts and get scores of what is happening with your system. At the end, you're gonna get this scenario, give you the metrics, give you everything that it's happening, and as well you define the metrics. There are many metrics, and this is very important. I recommend you to start with the three most important for you. For us was task completion rate, extremely important. It's what would you like to see, but as well we would like to evaluate if the agent is able to call the MCP correctly, because then we have a full MCP server that is actually open source. You can use it, and we would like to see that it's able to call the specific function that we would like that the agent call. Because you can do the task in multiple ways, but if you use the MCP that we have, it's gonna be less token, it's gonna be more efficient. We would like to replicate that. And as well, you can add more metrics in your system, time of first response, number of tokens. Like there are many other ones that you can integrate here. Cool. Let me answer some of the questions that we have right now, and I know that we have 7 minutes more. I am good in time. When applying agents, this is one of the questions Jeremy asked. When applying agents in health, what are the recommendations to ensure high accuracy of data? Okay, very important. And maybe if you can go in more detail, Jeremy, if you are talking about like hallucination with LLMs in this case, and we are talking about health, you mean like, yeah, maybe you can go in more detail in this question, but if I understood correctly, of course, you don't want your agent hallucinate in something that is related to health and something that can affect someone. Why I usually don't recommend to put directly LLM to give recommendation to people. What I recommend is maybe you can have traditional model like MLs in computer vision, for example, detection or classification algorithms that you can actually validate it and you can actually get metrics and then use this classification model as a tools for the agents in a way that if your user is using your platform, they can use the tool that they have, for example, the compute mistakeness, or maybe a classification algorithm to find a value and then use this value to give it to the user. Yeah, there are multiple techniques to improve accuracy. If we are talking about computer vision in general, that maybe could be the other question that is there. And you can apply, like, for us, the center of everything is data. We have a data-centric AI approach. That's why we believe that if you invest money in your data, you are going to have better results. If you focus in find scenarios in your data set that are not covered, if you focus in find these challenging classes that you are not able to label in or that you are not able to predict, that is going to be the goal. Like focus in understand your data in as much as possible, and that's going to be a key thing to do here. And the second question about up to lab mode, is in visual data set workflows, like these ones, how are evaluation metrics scores? How are evaluation metrics scored without relying on an element judge? So it's not recursive evaluation bias in the feedback pipeline. Oh, I love that. And I love that because there are, when I was exploring this, and I have to say, like, some of the things that I had been checking, multiple people just go to LLMs as evaluation, and actually it's good because it's more like a human perspective. It's not specifically, but I agree with you that we have to have traditional accuracy, traditional metrics to evaluate your agents. One of the basic ones could be just like triggering specific tools. If you have a controllable environment, for example, us that we are using 51, we can go directly and validate using some tools if the agent was able to call, not only call the tool, but it was able to get and filter correctly the classes. That's why in this case, we are evaluating the LLM as a judge that can let us know if the conversation is good, but in the same time, I can go with code. No LLM, I can go with code directly and create that rubric that the one that I show here. That's why maybe this question was before this slide. And actually create a specific rubric that allow you to evaluate the real value in your system. And that is very useful because now you don't have the risk that your model is hallucinating. You actually can go in detail, check the value that your system is getting, and return to this as a feedback. But this is possible. I'm sorry if maybe there is another case of use, but this is only possible because we are in 51. Like we are inside 51. We know the tool that we can use to measure and to get the response of the agent in the tool, and we can use that to get feedback. But if you are using that maybe in a, I don't know, in a chat base where you don't have a feedback loop, this is gonna be more challenging. And actually, I don't know exactly how to do it in that environment. But if it's in 51, you can use traditional code to get these metrics. And yeah, thank you for the two questions. Okay, in these 4 minutes, let me just go to some boxes. And I was trying, I'm gonna have a talk next week that is gonna be more focused in sandboxes. That's why I'm gonna try to go fast here. Next week, if you are interested in this topic, that for me it's my favorite, go to the talk. It's gonna be July 29, with amazing other speakers working with agents. I'm gonna try to go fast here, but as I said before, you can go to the talk there. And sandboxes. Why sandboxes are so important? Perfect example. I don't know, timing. Timing is perfect in life. OpenAI issue with Hugging Face. They create a sandbox. They create these limitations. They create this environment that the agent, it's just there. It cannot go outside in a way, like it has some restriction, but in the same time, they give them tools. The problem of that is that if you bring tools to the agent, and if you bring one tool that can create stuff, they can find a way to break the sandbox. That's why it's not only build a good sandbox, and this is one of the most important message. It's about what tool do they bring to your agent and what restriction do you bring to your tools that the agent is not able to use that tool to break your sandbox. Because now then your agent do whatever they want. And the simple thing to explain that is we get many feedback of users that they want to have a function where our agent actually write code. And we know that this is amazing because you can see it in Cloud Code and in all of these models. The agent create the code, give you the code, you run it, they fix it. It's amazing. They do all the loop. However, if you put the tool to code generation to an agent, they can use this tool to other things. For example, they can create a script that export all your data and put it in another format. Or they can do things that break the structure and the security that your system have. That's why it's a balance between how can I create a sandbox where the model can run, maybe something simple could be a virtual end with some, whatever you prefer to do. I have some examples with amazing people that are doing great jobs, like Langsmith and others. But if you create the sandbox, you have to be careful with the tools. Here, what we do was we create the code generation tool, but we create some limits in this system where the people cannot actually break this, cannot actually go and change and do something without permissions. Very simple, but we create something that is risk label, and each of the code generation has a risk label that is dangerous. It has to be user validated. It has some restriction of what who in the platform can do that. Like only admin can do these kind of things. And we create more guardrails that help us to give the user the possibility to write code, but have some restriction in a way that they cannot break this sandbox. Then we have plugin generation, similar idea. Many users want to have specific plugins as the one that I showed you before, the evaluations, the scenarios where we want to build a plugin. People want to build plugins inside the 51 agent. Now we can do that, but we do this with some restrictions. Like there are some specific ownership. The owner of this is going to be in something that we call developed, it's not in production. Only admins move this to production to affect the full system. Like there are multiple things that you can do to protect. This is very interesting one because we have a plugin generation that is for hybrid panels. If you work with 51, this is one of the most beautiful tools that our team creates. And what is the problem? With plugin, you can do whatever you want. You can install a specific package. You can do whatever you want. And this is good, but in the same time, it's risky for an agent that is working in enterprise. What we do was combine the ability to do all of these things with some of the restriction of, for example, imports that you can do or compiled version that you can do. We have a specific way to compile the code without break the system, and we have like other kind of things like there are some limitations of times and other kind of restrictions. The message here, as I said before, if you want to know more about sandboxes and tools, next week we are going to have a talk. But in general, the main message here is like you can provide these sandboxes to your system. You have to provide these sandboxes to your system, but as well be careful with the tool that you provide to your agent to be able to have the best results as possible. Okay, in this last 1 minute, I just want to talk about close the loop with tools like Playwright, where your agent can get feedback and of the thing that they are doing. And it's important because we are talking about sandbox, we are talking about tools that they bring. We can add the tool of Playwright to be able to understand what is happening in the platform and actually get real feedback of the thing that you are building and go to the locations. Now, this is only in open source because in enterprise, we open the issue that we said before. If the agent has access to the web itself, like in this case to the platform, they can do things that we don't want that they do today. But in this case, in open source, when you are iterating and finding and creating your own plugin, it's a perfect tool to apply. Okay, just to close here, important message. We talk about scenarios, we talk about sandbox, we talk about agents, all of these tools. This is a feedback loop. This is not something that you do the evaluation one time, you run the scenario, one scenario. No, you have to create multiple scenarios. You have to get these failures. That is good that you find it before the user find it. You have to annotate and fix that failures, that specific issues. You have to grow your evaluations, and that's going to make that you have a better agent at the end. And there are tools. I'm gonna share these slides if you want. There are amazing tools. Landsmith, Landchain, they are doing amazing things with observability. I am not telling you to use you from scratch. Use the tool that exists today. Use platforms like this one that can help you. Be careful with the benchmarks and data sets because this is cool, can give you metrics and a standard, but it's different of your model. Like if there is a new model tomorrow, it's fine, can break all the benchmarks. But if this model is not working with your data as the way that you want, you have to fix that. And the only way to do that is if you have your own evaluation, if you have your own harness, and if you can evaluate that in your platform. Perfect. I don't have more answer or no in the QA, but if there is some question, Jimmy, just let me know. And if you want to know more about agents, book a demo. This is the QR code. Just scan it, and we can explain some of the things that we are doing with physical AI data.